StorMagic, we are all about edge. And that may be different from what you hear from other vendors. We don't think about creating storage, hyper-converged solutions for the cloud or for the data center. So our whole message is about edge computing. You will see us talk about SMB, small businesses, small organizations. And the reason for that is their needs are very similar to what a site or an edge computing site would look like. So we're targeting edge and SMB. We focus on mission critical. So we have over 2,000 customers around the world, and all of them are dependent on us to run all of their on-site applications. So a big piece of what we do is ensure uptime. And we'll talk more about that because there's a slide coming up to have the cloud versus edge chat, but we can do that in a few minutes. And we've been around for about 16 years. Our brand is quite well known. I will say it's probably more well known in the US. And that's one of the reasons we're here is we need to make sure we spread the word further in UK and throughout Europe. But I will say that more than half of our business is Europe. So it's split about half US, Canada, North America, and half rest of the world. So we have a lot of presence in Europe, especially with our relationship with HPE, which I'll talk about here in a second. Okay, I won't spend a lot of time on this because you're all in this world or familiar with this world, but we do continue to beat the drum with being mentioned in analyst reports and getting awards for our products and how we go to market and the channel, et cetera. So a little bit of credibility building here on this slide, but we don't need to spend time here unless anyone has questions. And Mark, by the way, since I can't see if someone raises a hand, just let me know, pause me if I need to stop and take a question.
Will do.
Okay? Yeah, feel free to jump in at any time. So here's a list of a smattering of our customers. So one thing you'll notice is that when we talk about edge and SMB, that opens up a huge market for us, and we are not industry specific. So we have customers across any vertical market you may think of. I will say that retail has become a big one for us just because of the number of sites that they typically have. So in the retail hospitality space, typically what these retailers are doing is they're using our solution in the stores. They need to run applications, they need uptime, and they don't have a lot of money. So they look for the lowest cost way to keep their in-store applications up. And that's where we get a good chunk of our business just because of the sheer size of those companies and the number of stores they have. But in terms of number of logos, it's clearly more down in this space. Manufacturing, healthcare, government, they're smaller accounts, maybe one site, 4 sites, 6 sites, instead of thousands of sites like up here. But the point of this slide is just to show you that we are popular with many customers around the globe in any vertical you may think of.
So the big thing with the retailers is, distribution centers, stores, it's a concept of centralized management. So they'll typically have an IPsec tunnel of some format to those remote sites, on-prem, low latency. It's all about then resiliency, their own private cloud in this little siloed bubble, okay? But there are various other use cases, and Bruce mentioned about SMB in a big way as well. And the difference with those tends to actually be more that it's then management on the box, on the cluster in a closed system versus a center and spoke or edge and spoke. Now, that can be academic in the way of schools and things like that, but actually where we then also do very, very well is almost as an OEM, where we're bundled in as a sort of part of the solution for other vendors to sell their own technology and get that into some really mission critical environments. So we're talking then airports, flight information display systems, baggage control systems, that when they back up, the entire world backs up. We're not responsible for whatever it was a few years ago with Heathrow, anyway, we weren't there, just to emphasize. It's a different model, I suppose, and the US, as you can imagine, with the size of the country, very much has that centralized management and all of these thousands of sites that we see quite commonly, okay? But we're seeing it more in Europe as well. So with Germany and government use cases and things like that, where they have a similar sort of requirement, or chemical companies where it truly is global. So when I, for example, hook up with one of their support teams, get on their system, I'm looking out at Argentina, at Brazil, whoever, for chemical companies and everything else as well. So making those data center features and functionality accessible and affordable to do it at the scale of potentially thousands. Does that make sense? Perfect. Over to you again, Bruce. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll just mention is that it doesn't happen often, but sometimes because we have the letters STOR in our name, sometimes people think that we're retail only. So that is not the case. That is clearly not the case. Okay, we do have an ecosystem of partners that we go to market with. I'll just point out a couple here that are kind of bubble to the top for me. One is HPE. We struck an OEM agreement with them, it's like 3 years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, where when they were end-of-lifing StorVirtual, and I'm sure some of you in the room are familiar with that product, it was a competitive product for what we do, software-defined storage. When they end-of-life that product, they chose to move to StorMagic. So whenever HPE sales teams around the world are selling small edge storage, they typically are positioning SvSAN. So that's been a great relationship for us, and that's a good chunk of our business. We also have an OEM relationship with Lenovo, so that one brings lots of obviously value to the company. And the other couple I'll mention here is like Zerto and Commvault. This will come up later when Mark's talking, but we partner with the backup archive folks as a way to bring a full solution to our customers.
In regards to the HP StorVirtual piece, it's quite interesting to me to hear the HP reps that loved StorVirtual, but it was very much focused as a data center SMB, these side of things. I'm hearing those guys come to us and go, we love what you've done with this edge messaging and with this edge use case, and seeing that at the scale of 2,500, 3,000, 6,000 sites, like some of our use cases, that actually they almost wish that they've been able to get that into that space, and are singing our praises and seeing how we're solving those problems. So even the HP reps are singing our praises about it as well, which is nice to hear. Over to you, Bruce.
Okay. All right. So let's get into it and have some fun here. So I suspect that everyone around the table might have a slightly different definition of edge computing, and I think that's a topic on its own. But when we talk about edge computing, we're basically talking about the place where data and people and transactions are happening. The simplistic way that we view it is that if it's not in a data center or if it's not in a cloud, then it's the edge. Now, that's fairly loose as well, because then there's big edges where there's hundreds of servers, there's microsites. That's not our world, right? So again, I don't want to use the word far edge because everyone has a different definition of that. But basically, where we focus is where customers need a small amount of IT kit to run local applications and store data and keep it up all the time. And that's where we play, and that's the edge that we play in. And because of our focus there, you'll see when Mark does product demos, the product has been able to be designed to be very simple. It works, it does what it needs to do, but it doesn't have the expandability, perhaps, that maybe a vSAN has, where you can have dozens or hundreds of nodes in a big cluster. That's not our world. We didn't have to design for massive. We designed for small, and it works really, really well. So I get this question a lot when I'm talking to investors. I think for this crowd, maybe not so much. I'll just go quickly. If anyone wants to slow me down or challenge me here, let's have that chat. But in general, what we see is customers are growing their edge computing infrastructure and deployments because they can't do everything in the cloud. The cloud is great for lots of things, and I'm not here to say cloud is going away, but I am saying that we are seeing huge growth in the need for edge computing because the cloud doesn't allow many use cases to do what they need to do. It can be too expensive for running applications and sending data and storing data. There's the whole internet reliability issue. If the internet happens to go down for an hour, then your store is down for an hour kind of thing. Performance, no matter how fast your networking gear is, you still have the speed of light to deal with. So there are some apps that just need to run locally. There's particularly in UK and Europe with regulations on data movement, it typically has to stay in country, et cetera. So cloud can be problematic there. And the other thing that we're seeing growth of is customers needing to do their analytics locally. They no longer have time to send data to a cloud and let some corporate group do some analytics and send results back the next day. They're looking to run analytics at their edge sites, and that just can't be done through the cloud. So these are the reasons why we're seeing lots of growth for edge computing. I don't know if anyone wants to poke at it, question it, or we can just move on. Mark, do you see any questions coming? We're good? People are nodding maybe?
I think we're good. I get some smiles at least. Thumbs up.
All right. All right. Okay, nice. All right. So with that, here are and I'm watching the clock. I want to make sure I don't take too much time. With that, here's what we see for our edge computing and SMB challenges that our product that Mark's going to show you here obviously solves. So these are the main things that we see is that they're struggling with needing to deploy lots of sites. They have lots of devices at each site that data needs to be collected. So they're struggling with how to manage all of this. Unplanned downtime is a huge problem, and many companies that we talk to and that we sell to are starting a base where they only have a single server running all their applications, and they're just tired of the downtime. So they're looking for high availability. Budgets are constrained because of thousands of sites. A 100-pound or 1,000-pound delta in a solution makes a big difference if you have 1,000 sites. Or if you're an SMB, your budgets are small already. So everyone in this space can't afford a Nutanix node or some other expensive implementation at the edge. It just doesn't work. Support is limited or non-existent. Most of these edge sites don't have an experienced IT person. Maybe you can have someone that can rack and stack a server or can pull a power cord and reset a switch, but there's really no IT support available, so we had to design around that. There's limited space at the edge, so they can't have 3, 4, 5 servers and lots of network switches. They need compact design. And then security becomes a bigger issue at the edge because most hardware, software solutions have been architected for the data center and the cloud. But in this world, there's no physical security, or I should say physical security is limited. So it's easy for bad actors to not just come through over the internet, but they can be physically in the store, at the manufacturing site, doing something stupid. Purposely damaging a server, pulling a drive, stealing something. So securing data at the edge has been a problem that we keep hearing over and over again. So this is our product lineup. These are the 3 product areas. We are going to focus today on SvSAN, which is our bread and butter. This is what we've been selling for 10 to 15 years. It is software-defined storage that is sold as a hyperconverged solution, and it provides our customers 100% uptime with only 2 nodes. Mark's going to explain all of that. The second one is RQual DMS. We do have many customers at the edge that have video surveillance needs, and we acquired a company a few years ago in this space. So now we have the ability to deliver not just the storage, but the video surveillance software needed to operate their IP cameras at each site. So that's a whole story in itself, which we won't go into today. SvKMS is our encryption key management, and this does play into SvSAN because we do allow our customers to encrypt all of the data inside our solution. And wherever there's encryption, as you all know, you need an encryption key, and that can start to get out of hand. So we have our own encryption key management product. Again, we're likely not going to go into details of that today, but we do have an encryption key manager that is enterprise class, And our customers use it not just for SvSAN, but for anything that they're encrypting in their environment, whether it's on-site, storage, servers, backup, it could be cloud. So anything that they're encrypting, we have an enterprise class encryption key manager, which again is a subject for another discussion someday.
Yes, please.
On this point,
That's the role.
Sorry, hold up, Bruce.
Go ahead.
yeah.
Yep.
On this point, it's a kind of bring your own key management system, or it's
Forgive me, can you repeat the question for me?
Is it a bring your own key solution?
So essentially you can host it yourself, or we also have a key management as a service offering. Okay, so if you imagine most people's encryption headaches, it's about where do they put that KMS to separate lock from key. So for our enterprise organizations, per my piece about having that central kind of point, they will pretend to host it themselves up in their main data center and use those keys to encrypt edge sites. Pharmacy use cases could be one. There's 350 sites of pharmacy with SvSAN. Yeah? But for the SMB use cases, for the schools and things like that, they then struggle with having something separate, something, be it separate hardware or physically separated, to get that separation. So what they tend to use then is the key management as a service, where they get a tenancy in our platform that we host, and they can do IP whitelisting to be able to secure that.
And you also operate that?
And we also operate that as well, exactly that. So it solves both problems. We've probably got about a 50-50 split between the two.
Who is the owner of the keys? Who is the owner of the keys?
They own the keys. It's their tenancy. We don't get access to them. They log in, they see their keys, they manage their keys, they back up their keys. It's their system. It's just a tenancy in our cloud platform for that. Okay? Great.
Mark, can you please check with people around the table whether they are all following the technical details, because not everyone has the same level of background in this type of technology. It's certainly going straight over my head. But, I'm not nowhere as technical as you guys, so maybe can you just check? Is everyone following the conversation? Everyone familiar with all the acronyms that are being used? It makes sense to everyone?
Yep.
Yeah,
there's some good notes. There's some good notes there. I mean, to give the 30,000-foot view, fundamentally, when you encrypt something, you need a key to encrypt it with. You don't put your key under the doormat, at least I try not to at home. So you separate it, you put it in a vault, you put it in a KMS, a key management solution, that you try and separate from whatever you're encrypting. We offer then a key management solution that can be hosted by the customer. It's a VM that they host, or alternatively, we have a cloud platform that they can run as well. Okay? Thank you very much. Back to you, Bruce.
Okay. All right. Mark, what I'm going to do now is to not chew up too much time. I'm going to hit some key slides and go a little bit on the fast slide, because you're going to cover the details of this. But just to introduce really briefly, and Mark probably has the same slide in his deck, which is just to show basically what we do. So SvSAN, again, software-defined storage. It runs as a virtual machine on a hypervisor, and we support VMware, Hyper-V, as well as, I'll call it Open KVM, which means the customer uses KVM. It's not our own. So customers that are into KVM can run our VM as well for SvSAN. It is software only, obviously. We talked about 100% uptime. So our technology is designed to make sure that every I/O is written on the opposite server before the next write operation happens. So we're guaranteeing to customers that they always have two locations of all of their data, so that if something bad happens with a server or a card that causes an outage, that applications will migrate over, and Mark will explain this much better than I can. But this is our world. We synchronously mirror data between two servers to ensure 100% uptime. We are very proud of the fact that it is super low cost, and I've got some pricing information at the very end here, which I'll get to. But it's a lightweight architecture. It does not take up a lot of space. It doesn't need a huge CPU or memory. It's a very light piece of code that runs, and it's super low cost for customers. And it's not just the cost of the software where we win business. It's all about reducing the amount of hardware that a customer needs. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. I'm going to skip through there just for the sake of time. Mark, I think you have this slide as well, but I just wanted to hit it at a high level. So our typical solution is 2 nodes, and this is our bread and butter. This is why customers, well, one of the main reasons customers buy from us is that they only need 2 servers. And as probably most of you in the room know, that the competition either requires 3 servers per site, or they highly recommend it, because once you go to their 2-node solution, there's all sorts of asterisks and extra networking that you need, etc. And Mark can explain that in detail if anyone wants to hear it. But the bottom line is we kind of stand alone here that 2-node is the way to go. And the way that we're able to do a 2-node is because we have this remote witness that is super lightweight. It can run on any type of hardware, even a Raspberry Pi. It's a small VM, but that small VM can manage quorum across 1,000 sites. So that's 2,000 nodes. And the reason we're able to do that is it is not in the data path. So it's not sending and receiving data from all of these sites. All it is doing is checking heartbeat. And that's what enabled us to get this low networking requirements, 9 kilobit per second for bandwidth and up to 3,000 millisecond latency. So for those of you that know those numbers, that's a pretty robust solution. We have customers that use us on oil rigs and cruise ships where there is no internet except you have some kind of satellite or cell phone connection. So we can run in those environments, and that is why we win a lot of business, is that customers love the fact that they only have to deploy 2 servers per site and this small little witness to manage up to 1,000 sites. We also offer a witness as a service, where if a customer doesn't want to stand up their own witness, we'll do it for them in the cloud, and we can manage all of their sites from our cloud-based witness. That is another option for our customers. Okay, Mark, hopefully you're going to talk about this in more detail, but this is what I started to say, is that we win business. Our software is fairly inexpensive, and but the real win here for customers is that significantly less hardware they need to purchase and operate and run and power and cool, etc. So, if you compare us, I would say, I assume it's okay to talk about competitors in here. It'll be light, and I'm not competitor bashing. I'm being as factual as I can, but SvSAN is one that we compete against all the time. And we've won a lot of business against them because when a large customer thinks about 1,000 sites or 6,000 sites, that extra server adds up very quickly, right? And the networking infrastructure you need to manage a remote witness gets very, very expensive. So this is our space. We reduce our customers' CapEx significantly because of our architecture. Mark, you have that slide in your deck, so I'm going to skip. I'll just hit data encryption real quick, so maybe you don't need to cover it, Mark, unless we get more questions. But we do enable, as an add-on feature, we allow our customers to purchase encryption, data encryption, so they can encrypt everything inside of the SvSAN system. So if they had 1,000 sites, 2 nodes, all of that data would be encrypted. We don't use self-encrypting drives. Those are more expensive than a standard drive, and they're difficult to deal with because now you've got to figure out how to procure them, and they're not always available. So we have our own encryption software that we've written, so we can enable encryption on everything that comes into our system. We encrypt before the synchronization of data, so now both sides are encrypted data. And of course we are open, so we support the industry standard KMIT protocol. Customer can use any key manager they want, but of course we prefer them to use our SVKMS. Okay, so that's what we do for encryption. I do want to talk about growing a little bit here, and Mark can go further into it, but in terms of growing a system, the 2 ways we do is scaling up or scaling out. And scaling up is simple in that if they want to add more storage, go for it. Whatever they want to do, whatever they want to do. So we can scale up a node by simply adding more storage to the server or attached to the server like a JBOD. That's not a problem. But our scale out model is different than most in the industry in that we would create a 2-node cluster, and then a customer can attach as many compute nodes to that as they like. So we act as an iSCSI target, and we have customers that build a, whatever it is, 10 terabyte, 100 terabyte, 2-node solution with SvSAN, then they attach more compute nodes as they like, and we don't care, meaning SvSAN isn't required on those nodes. So as far as cost goes, it is a very low-cost way to scale out. When you scale out with VMware, you're paying VMware vSAN licensing across the board here. So we do get a lot of attention on those customers that need more than 2 nodes. They can scale out with, I was going to say it's not free, but we're not making more money on the scale out, is my point. All right, a couple quick examples, some pricing, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark. So in the retail space, like I said, we do have many customers in this space. They basically will run all of the in-store applications on 2 SvSAN servers. Any brand, any model, et cetera, but these are just some examples of the applications that they run. But anything that they need to run their business at the store is run on 2 servers, and then of course they scale to across as many sites as they want. I think our largest today, I don't know the exact number, but it's over 6,000 sites is our largest retail customer today. And then on the SMB side, this is where maybe it's a single site, it's a small business, but they need to run applications locally. So the applications running are slightly different. It's probably more about domain controller, print services, a customer database. It's a single site, but it's the same story. The growth and the expansion probably isn't as important, but having a reliable 2-node solution that they know is going to be up and running to run their local business is really important. So here's the pricing slide, just so you get a feel for it. List price is, for a single node, is $1,440 plus maintenance. So for a 2-node solution of ours, it's what, 2,880, under $3,000 plus maintenance, which isn't, doesn't increase the price that much, and that's a perpetual license. So it is a small it is a small price to pay for the functionality that the customer receives. And what we like to say, I think actually I'm on the next slide, maybe I don't. What we like to say is a customer can deploy a full 2-node solution with the server cost and hypervisor cost for under $10,000. And that is an attractive proposition to these edge customers that can't afford a Nutanix or a big deployment because it's just too expensive. So under $10,000, a complete solution with a perpetual license. So that's our story from a high level. Mark's going to take you through the details, but again, we're designed for edge and SMB. That's our space. Super lightweight software. I didn't mention the 3rd node, but Mark's definitely going to go into that. The tiny witness, which can manage up to 1,000 sites. We can scale out to enable more compute nodes at no additional cost. I didn't talk about predictive storage caching, but we do offer the ability to have performance improvement if customers want to do some caching or storage tiering is another way to think of it. And we do support containers as well. So I tried to keep to 30 minutes. I think I pretty much nailed it, so that Mark has a full hour to dive deep. What questions do you have for me, or should we just jump right into it?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please. Bruce, thank you very much for the presentation. And it's really not usual to see, company showing some pricing. So my question is, if I were a customer or a prospect, I would ask you up to what discount you can go based on those prices.
Okay, you're asking about price. I heard most of the question, Mark, but was it about pricing and discounting?
So effectively, it's unusual for us to talk about pricing and to publish pricing. What level of discounts are available off of that list price?
Yeah, so I can't, well, The good news is I'm not in sales, so I can't give information that I don't know.
Good one.
That's a good way to get out of it.
We sell through the channel, so channel is our business. We don't sell direct, and we have a network of distributors and VARs around the world that sell our products along with the solution, right? So they're going to build the hyperconverged solution with the servers and everything else the customer needs. We do have a channel program where our channel partners receive discounts depending on their business with StorMagic, right? So there's a whole channel discussion here. Our favored VARs get up to like a 30% discount, 30% margin, but that's probably a longer conversation to get into. Mark, I'm not 100% sure I answered the exact question.
You did. I think there's certainly some nods, as you say, it's, you know, with deal regs and things like that, there's that channel program, and that's well established. There's some good partners out there that, you know, are bringing everything to us and everything else. So.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any plans to open source some of this for very low-end deployment?
I'm just going to repeat the question, sure, so that's okay. So are there any plans to open source any of the technology for lower cost deployments?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, it's funny, no, there's no current plans to do that, but we have had internal conversations about it over the years. But no, the answer is as of right now, there's no plans to do it, but it is something that we toy around with.
So Bruce mentioned something about open KVM earlier as well. Okay, so you can imagine 6,000 sites. We're like this big of that deal cost. You then get the servers, and then you get your hypervisor. Now, most of those enterprise accounts are VMware all day long because they have the staff, they know the technology and everything else. Obviously, KVM is becoming more and more attractive to them. The approach that we took with KVM, per Bruce's comment, was to be able to leverage open source technology for that compute clustering and make it work with ourselves as the shared disk to be able to work in a two-node configuration with our witness, okay? So no, we don't open source SvSAN itself, but a customer can leverage open source KVM with our solution stack that is all fully documented, supported, and everything else to be able to lower their cost of entry point if they're looking at doing it at the scale of 10,000.
And so let me ask a follow-on to that. Have you worked with LXC and LXD?
No. So everything today is that block storage. Anything else that you're doing around containers and KVM with that kind of stuff is separate to ourselves. We're just presenting up a block disk. That Ubuntu stack, that open KVM stack, is using Pacemaker as the clustering technology. Okay. So our disk, looking at the state of our disks to be able to control network isolations and everything else.
Thanks.
Okay.
What's the smallest hardware spec you can install on?
So Bruce, smallest hardware spec that we can install on. Do you want to take that or myself?
I couldn't hear the question, so you take it.
So we saw earlier about the 2 terabyte license. Our licensing brackets, you can tell by those, are focused in these edge environments. Okay, it's 2, 6, 12, and then unlimited. The unlimited is literally as much as you can fit in the box or hang off the back, effectively. So as far as the smallest, I have in my lab environment, in our colo data center, some edge lines. These are HP sort of edge-focused hardware with a couple of 4 terabyte NVMEs that we RAID 1 within these little cartridge systems. Mirror, you've got this little 2-node hyperconverged 4 terabytes of flash storage in this little 1U system. The 6,000 site customer that we mentioned a couple of times, and again I've kind of got a little overview of that customer as well, that's tower servers. That's about 4 terabytes of 2.5-inch SSD in those locations. So we can go extremely small. What's nice about our technology is the flexibility that the software is bringing, that per your point, customer chooses that hardware, or partner chooses that hardware to right size, rather than being a thou shalt run with this version of VMware, it must need this cache SSD, it must need this firmware, it must need this thing. It's VMware and other hypervisors are taking care of that abstraction piece that we can then just slot on top and provide what we do very easily, very quickly, very simply, and very robustly for these edge environments. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I'm also wondering if you're targeting things like Intel's new range of sort of edge NUCs and things like that.
Not yet. I mean, the biggest thing with the robo configurations is then the likes of XCC and IMM and iDRAC and the hardware manageability that goes along with it. So you can imagine that a lot of the deals that we come into, we're brought in with a hardware vendor. You know, we're a piece of that puzzle for the HP Complete relationship that we have there. So they're obviously going to be pushing their own things at that point. So absolutely, you know, you want to put me on top of a robust laptop, I have use cases like that for the military. We don't necessarily get involved with that. That's an integrator that's kind of bundling that in. But I have use cases with closed systems out on ships with what is effectively like a Panasonic Toughbook, but beefier for those kind of use cases. So again, take your pick. It's not, we don't necessarily focus on hardware. We've got some nice collateral that, you know, demonstrates how we work with some of them and example numbers and all of that kind of stuff. But they're mainly hardware vendors and integrators that are taking care of that piece.
And are you x86 only, or also looking at ARM?
Today, x86. Again, referencing use cases and things like that, today VMware and ARM is yet, you know, enough for us to pursue it. There is no reason that we couldn't build and test and, you know, an ARM-based approach, but right now there just isn't enough market there. I can see the use case and I see it coming more, and again, per that piece about how small can you get it, and I'd love to see us in a world where we're in that little green box at the end of your road for your ISP and your broadband and metrics and monitoring and everything else in 10,000, like whatever, yeah? But that then takes us down a path of, you know, however we're bundled into that use case, that telco, that whatever, to be able to enable it. But I can see it, we're x86 today. Absolutely, but in the future, yes please. Okay, Bruce?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Sorry.
One more question, please.
So without giving trade secrets away, but if you were to look at the UK market at the moment, people that you don't sell to, who would be the ideal customer that your solutions would work for? Who would be the ideal large customer? Because it sounds completely scalable what you're talking about. The fact that you mentioned price, obviously you don't want to get into a whole how much do you get off blah blah blah, but you've mentioned it means you must be confident that it's value at that level. So who would be the ideal customer? Who's the person you'd pitch and you think this organisation should move to us?
Bruce, I mean, again, I'm just going to repeat the question for you. Maybe you have some input and then I'll chime in as a secondary. Who would be the ideal use case, the ideal customer? And you mentioned UK specific. Yeah. Who would be the ideal UK customer? I don't want to, whether you want to take a run at that or myself.
You can take it, it's fine. I mean, we have UK customers that we can talk about, right, Mark? I mean...
So you already flashed up the logo slide.
In the UK.
I was supposed to be being careful, by the way, when I came into this room. I'm the techie guy that gets excited about all the existing use cases. I was told to be careful coming up in here, and he flashes up the logos of these different use cases.
It's okay.
So you can imagine that the retail is a big thing. Okay, so what we're seeing is the likes of Tesco's in that retail space and everything else, effectively wanting a data center in their store, and they want it in a little rack that they can shove in the back of a warehouse. They want to do, you know, high availability, virtualization, containerized applications, machine vision. You know, it could be 4 terabytes, it could be 500 terabytes. They don't know. They want to be scalable for the future and everything else, and they want someone to solve that problem for them yesterday. Now, okay, let's take a run at it and let's work together and do it, and separate. But you get the idea that that as a requirement is a lot to fill to be able to start small and elastically grow up, which was Bruce's comment of rather than a vSAN and a 32 node to scale down, we've started at the bottom to then be able to grow up. And we're designed to be robust enough that we can tolerate cluster downs and nodes up and down and all this stuff for the hurricanes coming through the US and everything else. So those large retailers, yes, absolutely. Do we solve all the problems? No, we don't. Okay, Bruce mentioned about Zerto and Kornfeld and everything else. We are dumb block storage. We are a piece of this puzzle. And the reason that we get chosen by those use cases is because we're simple and we work. Robust, okay? So, I mean, again, just touching on that, one of our use cases in the US has gone through 2 and about to go through their 3rd hardware refresh underneath that solution stack, having POC'd and tried with all the other big vendors and everything else, and they keep coming back to us because proven, tried and tested, and robust for when, you know, somebody comes in with a crowbar to a server or the hurricane rolls through and it's up and down like a yo-yo. That's where we excel, okay, those edge use cases. So that's the retailers, and then, as we mentioned, it's you know, the single office architecture company that's got one guy trying to support a bunch of infrastructure, or the you know, the academic thing that, you know, the person that, you know, is actually a PE teacher and his main job is there trying to look after the systems. Again, simple, get it set up, leave it there, forget it's running, is where we also do very well. So those are the two main focuses. Does that help?
Yep.
Perfect.
When you say you're good for SMB solutions, how do you manage your customers when they grow from being SMBs to large enterprises? Is there a nasty point in the middle where they're too small, too big for you, and too small for...
That's a good question. And for the recording, for the video, we state that we're SMB and that we're enterprise. When is there a hard ground where there's kind of a cutover? When I say enterprise, and again, per that piece about edge is different things to different people. When I say enterprise, I'm talking about what I would call enterprise robo or enterprise edge and enterprise grade technology for the robustness that it's bringing and everything else. Is there a crossover point where an SMB could feel some pain in growing? It comes down to that elasticity piece on the storage side. We do very, very well at this synchronous mirroring and this block storage and everything else. And I have use cases with, you know, 4 terabytes of flash and 200 terabytes of spinners for video surveillance. I have use cases where we're sharing out in Synergy, HP Synergy racks to 16 compute nodes and we're managing a bunch of back-end storage. I have use cases where we have, what was it, about 60 terabytes of flash and 100 terabytes of hybrid in those same systems. So it's not so much a crossover point because I would suggest that those use cases are beyond SMB and into SME and enterprise, but what we're not is the vSAN as this kind of grow out to 32 nodes. Now that brings value because you don't have to scale those servers similarly. They don't all have to have storage and everything else. We're a different topology. It tends to be more that software-defined SAN and compute rather than, you know, kind of going and slurping out all those external servers. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Bruce, anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm excited to see the demo.
Well, we've done a bunch of slides. Forgive me, I have a few more slides that I'll zip through really quick because everybody loves a PowerPoint, and then we can actually show some technology as well, if that's okay with everybody. So we've talked about this quite a lot already in Bruce's stuff. The bit that I wanted to emphasize is this idea of giving the software flexibility that per some of these use cases of Synergy and 100 terabytes or Edgeline and 4 terabytes and things like that. What we're bringing is that flexibility that the integrator can choose HP or Dell or whoever they want. It makes no odds to me. It's all about that virtualization layer. And we've been, you know, VMware certified since 4.x and all of this kind of stuff for many, many years. Okay? Now, what this is all about is eliminate any single point of failure. You know, I mean, again, all of these points are resiliency for the edge. So I've referenced about crowbar earlier. One of my customers, disgruntled employee, took a crowbar to one of those servers. Again, fell over, fine. The edge is not the same as the data center, is my point. The 6,000 site had a Humvee drive through one of the stores. I love the US. Where else would that happen? I suppose George Michael. But Humvee drive straight through an environment, and what they did, because again, software and flexibility, lift the disks from the one box, plug them into a new one, up it came. Okay? It comes down to, or the bit that I'm trying to emphasize, is a lot of the other technologies are enterprise class but data center focused. They're still dependent on that nice colo data center, UPS power backed and air cooled and everything else. We kick them out of this stuff as QA and test and everything else so that the cluster can go down and it will self-recover. You know, so we're not just talking about high availability and failover and fault tolerance and all of those kind of things out there at the edge, so data center features out there at the edge. I'm talking about technology that can handle the edge's scenarios, and as global warming and weather and who knows what else, my environment is, we've had a flood in that Tesco warehouse, for example, or we've had a hurricane go through, as I referenced, and up and down like a yo-yo. Yep. Now, the key piece to that is the quorum logic. That's the bit, the witness and everything else, and that shareable witness that's going to enable all of those different failure scenarios. And I've got some animations that I can talk to that in a minute. But the other piece about bringing the most value from the hardware that we're on is obviously lightweight, but it's also on the storage side, data locality. Okay? So here, any applications, any VMs will be reading from their local storage. and VMs here reading from their local storage. Now the reason that I'm referencing that is in most of those robo use cases, those systems are in a site, I say, excuse me, isolated LAN, you know, there's your environment. Those systems are in close proximity to each other. But we've got a good number of use cases as what you would describe as a metro cluster or a stretched cluster, where as connectivity between these locations with things like dark fiber becomes more affordable, we're actually not just talking about then, you know, server protection, we're talking about room failover, data center failover, and things like that. So, you know, those academic customers that I referenced, they'll tend to put them in separate rooms for power rail resiliency and things like that. Or airports with those flight information display systems, they'll be at separate ends of the airport, for example, things like that. So a stretched cluster, and that becomes interesting because if there's then, say, a 1 gig pipe between, with that synchronous mirror, all of your I/O is still local. So it's only your writes that see that latency and see that network bottleneck if those WAN links aren't great. Does that make sense, first and foremost? So again, software flexibility, we're trying to give the most value back from the architecture that we can, such that you can do it simply and easily, I suppose. Manageability, we'll get into in a big way, and I can show you a bunch of that stuff when it comes to vCenter on the cluster or vCenter central, or even then, as Bruce I'm sure will touch on very briefly, separate to vCenter as well. The witness will dig into optional caching, as I've referenced, and flexible scalability. So this is just emphasizing, you know, that piece of the puzzle, and again, then, you know, Lenovo, HP, Cisco, I don't care, it's a piece of hardware, and per your piece, it could be a DL380 with 100 terabytes of flash, it could be something that's like a microserver, which we've also got validated, you know, as these little things that could sit a couple in a, you know, cupboard under the stairs, for example, as use cases as well. Okay, but the bit versus the NUCs and things like that, they have that those don't, is all about that hardware management. Because again, if we're talking edge, you want some visibility into what's going on at that hardware layer, as well as the virtualization in the software stack as well. So I'd suggest probably 80+% of our business is that 2-node hyperconverged with the density that you can get in a server these days for these edge use cases. If I reference a 1U box with 7 terabyte SSDs that you can get at a sensible price point now, you know, you can build some very beefy systems. What I'm also actually seeing, and I don't think it's in this deck, is that AMD are coming into play at the edge, where they might be Intel at the main data center because they're not failing over between or migrating between, AMD giving them then single socket, save on the VMware licensing, higher core count, all that stuff. Lovely, great, no odds to me whatsoever. It's just a nice little value prop that, you know, we don't care if it's a virtualization, and per your point, it's x86 today, but it's a nice little value add, I suppose. And we've got some example performance numbers on both Intel and AMD for comparison as well. But as a reference then, you know, you can share out compute only, you can do hybrid, take your pick, whatever buzzword you want to put on it, or whatever marketing term. We're simply taking ownership of that storage. It's typically through a hardware RAID adapter or software RAID ourselves to get some internal node resiliency, and then sharing it out external to the system over the network or loopback. The 3-node, as I referenced, this is then typically because they've already been talking to some of those other vendors and they've gone, you must have 3, or per that pharmacy, what they do is some idea of some self-healing clusters. So if they want to take a node out of the cluster for maintenance, for VMware upgrades, things like that, they'll effectively resilver that storage between the surviving pair to go from a 3 to a 2 and a 2 to a 3, so that they can non-disruptively maintain their HA even during upgrades and everything else.
Is there a window, so if you know your maintenance window is 90 minutes, do you have to resilver even if the other node's coming back in?
There's timers that you would set, effectively, yeah. At the moment, full transparency, I'm making more of that than it is today. I want to see it grow further, similarly to a vSAN, you know, it's a 60-minute timer, everything else. That today is automation. It's automation of existing tools, it's scripting, effectively, that they're leveraging to do that. But they do that in 350 sites where they replaced VNXs on these little Lenovo boxes, SR, something's 250s, I think. So again,
Hey, Mark,
yeah.
before you move on, I want to make one comment. I don't think you mentioned this, but maybe you did. I'll just go quick. We're talking to actually go back one more slide. On the flexibility front, Mark mentioned we support any model, any version of server. The other differentiator here for us is that we're completely open and flexible, and customers don't have to run the exact same server. CPU models can be different, memory different, firmware levels different. We hear from customers that configuring some of the competitive solutions out there can be very difficult because they have to make sure that it's like for like down to the firmware, and we're not like that at all. As long as the two nodes can run the same version of the hypervisor, we're good to go to make a cluster out of it. So that's just another flexibility thing I wanted to point out.
Yep. Thank you, Bruce. So per that piece about lightweight, and lighter weight servers and microservers and things like that, obviously the more you take off of that system for hypervisor for ourselves, the less there is for the applications. We start at 1 vCPU, 1 gigabyte of RAM. So for example, 2,500 site retailer currently refreshing to, what are they, DL325s? Whatever the one UAMD box is that's coming out, was Gen 11. Was about 7 terabytes of flash, 1 gig, 1 vCPU, everything else is free for those guest VMs. If we're doing things like data at rest encryption, then we actually recommend throwing more CPU at it for some of that overhead, things like that. But again, it's a very lightweight appliance, is my point. Leaving everything free, or as much as possible free for those applications. They're what's important. And per Bruce's point, when you scale to 3,000 servers, times that by 2 for 6,000 servers, everything counts because those numbers start to add up very quickly when it comes to the hardware budget as well. The appliance itself, it's a custom storage stack, our own, that's our IP effectively. Closed appliance, penetration and security tested for every release, running in military and government use cases as well. So it's all nice and secure from that perspective. And it's an appliance model. It's a 512 meg dual boot, tiny little thing, excuse me, that then has this journal drive for changelog tracking. So I referenced use cases with 100 terabytes. We do have them. We do a full copy on a new creation, but anything after that is just a quick resync of the changes. Again, as least impactful to those virtual machines as possible to maintain that resiliency. There's a layer of protection within our technology as well from critical storage failures. There's a storage failed concept within SvSAN that critical I/O down to one node fails, proxy the I/O to the other side, send the alert that you need to have a look at that physical hardware as well. Okay. So this is how those sort of robo customers look. Okay. And again, those have been cases where they've never virtualized before. This is their sort of first virtualization project of the edge. It's something that they've used in the data center. They've never done it on the edge, and they're putting out their, that resiliency because they need it and trying to get there as simply and cost effectively as possible. It's also then been situations where they have a poor man's HA. That sounds a little bit derogatory. It's not meant as such, but they're doing some form of replication, a manual failover to bring things back. To bring them in line to a sort of true HA scenario, and then doing some backup and some DR alongside us, or they're doing SAN replacement. So MSAs, Equalogics, VNXEs, a software approach to be able to replace those hardware-based solutions. Okay. But that comes down to that centralized vCenter. There's no reason per those closed systems and the laptops and everything else that all of that can't live on top of that cluster as well. And then most of my robo customers cookie cutter. So for supportability, they look as exactly the same as possible. It's a different IP subnet for each location, and then everything else just looks as the same as possible because they then, in the nicest possible way, farm that support off to whatever, GMS or whoever it is as the third-party management company, keep it as simple as possible. Okay? But there's no reason that for those global customers, there's a certain taxi company, they might have 6 terabytes on Cisco in one country and then 2 terabytes on a Supermicro box in another country because that's what they can get. So there's no reason you can't t-shirt size as well. Within the 2-node, we quite commonly see direct connect with the links. The nice thing there, of course, is that you could do 10 gig, 25 gig back to back. We've got various networking examples in the online documentation that we commonly see. But again, it comes back to that flexibility play that it makes no odds to me. It's just TCP networking. So if it's 25 gig, great. If it's 10 gig, no problem at all. If it's back-to-back, if it's switched, if it's it's just networking. We fully support 1 gig, and what you're effectively doing is controlling where the traffic flows with different flags on the different interfaces. Okay? The reason that I'm referencing that is within this 2-node hyperconverged, you'd effectively get your incoming and your sync over those back-to-backs. But if I was sharing external, maybe I want my sync over these, and my incoming from whatever on a different network. Again, you just build the networking to suit. Flexibility is the key.
Are you saying that you can't have a situation where one thing fails over the other one, and you're running on one unit for the next 6 months without realising it fails?
So not without realising. It's always going to know, and it's going to notify you over email, SNMP, syslog, as long as you have those things configured. And don't get me wrong, I have those customers that forget about this stuff and don't. But absolutely, be it that you've had between your ILOs and your iDRACs and everything else on the storage side and us, you're going to get something that goes, no, one of these systems is in a bad state. That's not to say that these third-party companies don't leave them out there for 6 months before kind of going, oh, it's all gone bad, and we go, well, that's because it's been in a bad state for 6 months. Those things still happen, but we've certainly told them.
I mean, that's the failure mode that scares me most, is things are so smooth and so seamless that people just forget about them, and they don't notice it only running on one.
I mean, again, it's a nice place to be when people can forget that you're even deployed out there because you're that solid at what you do. That's a good thing. From sales perspective, when we phone them up for a renewal, who are you? What is this thing? But as I say, we do have those mechanisms in place. It's highly unlikely they have to have pretty much ignored it to actually end up in that situation.
That sounds like typical users, but
pretty much, yes. I wouldn't argue with that. The users, not necessarily the third-party support companies. There I beg the question. Excuse me. So we've touched on the witness in a big way so far. Shareable, 1 to 1,000. That 1 to 1,000, it was all about the vCenter number. So the maximums, I think, within vCenter was 3,000 hosts. That's 1,000 two-node clusters, 1 witness to 1 vCenter. Okay? It can go much higher than that. I think the maximum's now 2,500 hosts. We can go 10,000. It's a nice line in the sand to kind of go, it's a shareable witness. The key number is this one here. It's 9 kilobits per second. Okay? 9 kilobits out of your WAN location, out of your remote site, when you're already maybe running backups and such to it, is not a big deal. But when you then start saying to a customer, say 1.5 megabit as a round number, I just pulled out of thin air. You take that out one site, that's not so bad, you might be able to live with that. You then times that number by 64 or 100 from your main data center. Your main data center is trying to do its own stuff. It's got its own things that it needs to serve and back up and pull in and push out and everything else. That's not insignificant amounts of your bandwidth that you're then purely dedicating just to delivering some storage that should just do a freaking job. Yeah? So with us then, 3,000 milliseconds of latency tolerated, so this thing can run over satellite links and everything else as well, and that 9 kilobits per second is just cluster state and heartbeat. Okay? And then the other key piece to this is the flexibility of it. I mean, again, most customers with those robos and those enterprise robos, it's up in their main data center, but I have other customers that will then put it on a QNAP, for example, local to the site that they're doing some view backups to. Maybe they're doing it on a Windows box, maybe they put it on, it doesn't make any odds to me, it's just a service that they can then install, for example. So again, there's military use cases, hardened rack chassis. I've even had customers install it in a guest shell on a switch as another for these air-gapped use cases. Now, do we go after them? Not necessarily. The HP and the likes pushes into them, yes, and we use it and like it very much, even when there's no DNS and everything else as well. So it's an interesting use cases out there. Now, the other piece to this, and forgive me if I'm preaching to the choir, the typical quorum logic with this stuff is that 1 node you're fine, 2 nodes you're isolated and you're down. You agree? You've lost your majority. That's quorum logic. That's what we want to protect the data from network isolations and everything else. We've changed that very slightly to be able to centralize that witness and run it over the WAN so that if I lose a node on site, what's actually going on under the hood is that surviving guy goes, hey, I've lost connectivity. Have you lost connectivity? Yes, you have. Right, I assume leadership. So they're active, they both service I/O, but there is a concept of leadership under the hood. Excuse me. Once that election has taken place, funnily enough, that's the bit that takes that 3 seconds, if that WAN link goes away on us, per your piece about the node being on a single node for 6 months, and nobody checking on it, if during that period that WAN link blips, makes no odds whatsoever, because he knows he's the last synchronized node, he continues to service I/O, he continues to present the data. So my point being, even if they are waiting on a break fix for a week, you're not dependent on that WAN to stay live throughout that scenario. So with all of the supply chain issues and edge messaging that we've been giving, this is the robustness that we're enabling that protects during those scenarios. Does that make sense? So you're not panicking while you're waiting 2 weeks for your hardware vendor to replace a drive. Does that make sense? The software provides you resilience. Any questions in regards to that? Full transparency, if the witness fails, then you have a node down. That election can't take place, we suspend the I/O and we protect the data. So it's all down to the order of the failure scenario. All of these failure scenarios that I'm talking about are published online. We try to be as open as possible about this stuff. You know, you want to know how this stuff is going to work if you're going to deploy it in 6,000 seconds.
And of course, if you do have a node down, you now have a single point of failure.
But you're internally RAID protected. So yes, you do, but you've still got your internal resiliency, your software resiliency within that single node. You're no worse than you were on a single box.
So how often does the witness service tend to fail?
It would be, so as a service, saying about these witness in the cloud things, I've got ones that have been running for 3 years, no issues at all. It's a very lightweight, doesn't do much. I don't mean badly, it just sits there and does its stuff. For it to actually fail, it's going to be something along the lines of someone's powered it off or deleted it or something that's gone on with a person. And at which point, if they did that with these multi-site customers, per that piece about notifications and everything else, all of those appliances are suddenly going to scream at you going, hey, that witness is going on. Oh, wait. Does that help? So this guy comes back, and per my piece about the journaling, quick resync, and it's ready to tolerate further failures. Quick resync just to change data while it was offline. I've referenced about critical storage failure in one of those systems. So again, say your controller goes out to lunch. We were saying about firmware. I think it was Bruce that mentioned firmware. Your controller goes out to lunch, fine. We see IO's timeout. We just proxy the IO to the other side of the mirror. Or a double drive failure in that RAID config. Again, you're in that same state that you're on a single node. You compute maybe access it across, but you get the idea. Then you get your notifications from your iDRAC or whatever's going on that goes, that service had an issue. And then the final one that I want to mention is environment power failure. So petrol filling station chains. I've got several of these that are 1,000 petrol filling station chains across the US, fast food restaurants, things like that. In those environments, they may not have UPS. And again, if you have some of these data center focused technologies and you take them down hard, they don't like it very much. Okay, if everything goes down, they get unhappy and you need to prod it and probe it and stroke it and bring it back. Now again, you're the guy that's going to be woken up at 3 in the morning supporting 3,000 of these locations. You don't want that to happen. You want it to just come back so that when people come back in at 9 AM or when power is restored, it's in a good state without you having to touch it. That's the whole point of an edge solution. Okay? So fundamentally, the systems go down hard, servers start as per their BIOS settings, hypervisor starts, we renegotiate all that quorum stuff for you, bring the storage online, guest VM start, no manual intervention required. Okay? And the magic behind that is we talk to the hypervisor through APIs to ensure that all that path availability is there so that it can come online and the applications and everything else can start from there. So again, whip the power up the whole thing, bring it back again, and we're good versus others that struggle with that kind of thing to a certain extent. So forgive me, you were asking about how small can we go. This is basically those edge line systems that I've referenced. They've got like some little boot storage for the hypervisor and for our appliance VM, and then be it VMware Direct Path, be it RDM, give those disks to our appliance. We'll do a software RAID 1 mirror over the two in that scenario because they're these little PCI NVMEs rather than sitting behind a RAID card. And you've got 4 terabytes of flash storage and you're off to the races. This is then something very similar to the video surveillance use case, or one of my video surveillance use cases. This is large form factor spinners. In this case, this is a 1U, but the customer's actually 2U, and they've then got 200 terabytes of these large form factor spinners for video, 4 terabytes of flash for the VMs and for the VMS VMs, and they're just using those spinners as that dedicated VMS store. So virtualized high availability VMS solution to be able to support then 20, 50, 100 cameras out there doing their thing when it comes to recording and retention and review and metadata and all that good stuff that we can talk about with VMS. This we were referencing about that pharmacy use case and this resilvering piece, as I say, so if they want to take a node out or they get notification, there's a trigger, starts a 30-minute timer. If it doesn't come back within 30 minutes, it does that resilver and change to the centralized witness. So in a 3-node config, that quorum happens local, but when you change up, you're just switching to that witness as well. So it's not just a data, but the quorum's then taken care of for you as well, but you still get that same sort of protection with regards to that. Full node. This tends to be, I mean, again, I don't have many of these, but you know, the message that I like to say here is that, say a customer starts off with a pair of, I don't know, I'm pulling servers, DL360s that have some spinners, and then they go, well, actually, I need some faster storage. I filled those servers with all of their bays and everything else. I want to add another couple that have, I don't know, 8 terabytes, 10 terabytes of flash storage in them. You just slot them in, and then all 4 systems can see the 2 different data stores. My point is, you can size the storage or scope the storage to the use case, I guess. It's the same thing within chassis or separate chassis. It's
are there limits to how much you can mix and match?
When it comes to how much you can mix and match, obviously where we are effectively a network grade 1, you're only going to be able to create the maximum mirror of the maximum storage in 1, and the writes are going to slow down to the speed of the slower storage.
Yeah.
So as an extreme example, if there was a 1-disk spinner to an NVMe, your writes are going to perform at the speed of the spinner. I need to get on really, really quick. So caching, it's there more and more within these edge use cases, everything's flash. But it is there for those larger capacities. 100% writes hit, and we also pull up read data into SSD. And then encryption that Bruce was referencing. Effectively, it's an encryption engine within those appliances. We hold the keys in volatile memory, such that an environment loses power, it has to re-get the key. If that server's stolen by somebody, it boots back up, it can't re-get the key, the data's locked. And then again, saying about publishing budgetary numbers, we're also very transparent and publish support numbers, performance numbers. There are various examples of performance numbers. We are dependent on that hardware for the performance that we can provide. Fundamentally, if the disk is quick and the network is quick, what matters to me is CPU and clock speed. And we've got various numbers that, if anybody's interested, we can give you access to the portal that gives you everything that's got all those sort of examples within. Okay, any questions while I flick over to actually show you some systems briefly? Have I covered off what people were hoping for?
You mentioned the witness node can be something like a Raspberry Pi. How small can the active nodes be?
So those microservers that we qualified on, what are they, 4 vCPUs, I believe? 64 gig of memory?
Yeah.
So pretty small. I mean, again, I'm not, the NUCs and stuff like that, I don't see, in all honesty, I don't see them. It's always server grade hardware.
Because you're only doing the storage side anyway, the SAN side anyway. So there's someone else takes care of resilience for the applications running and things like that.
When you say resilient, so when you say someone else takes care of, the failover is handled by the hypervisor. Is how I would phrase it. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Be it a failover cluster in Hyper-V, be it pacemaker and KVM, be it VMware clustering. That is handled hypervisor side. We are handling, an MPIO failover disk. Effectively, one path goes away, the hypervisor fails over to the other path on the storage side. Yeah. So this is just to show a quick, example of these the sort of tools and things that are there for manageability within these robo customers. So be they those retailers or whatever else. Fundamentally, it's a plug-in virtual machine that pushes in, or vCenter pulls a plug-in from the VM. So the vCenter can be upgraded. That plug-in VM can be the witness, or you can have a separate witness. This then makes this view appear on the data center. So if I reference my robos, then it's a data center 1, a data center 2, a data center 200. It's a store number. It's a distribution center number or something similar. And that ties into whatever IP subnet is there on the infrastructure side to manage or administer. This allows you to deploy out appliances as sort of wizard-based and provision out all your storage. You can obviously see all of the appliances here in their different statuses. And you can view the sort of storage that we then have provisioned out there and what's going on with it and everything else. You get various statistics, all these kind of things. The bit that truly matters, if I just select one of these guys here, is that each of these disks is an MPIO disk that fundamentally, if I expand that across, Each host's active I/O path is the local appliance. So .3 in this case for host 1 to access its local appliance, .4 for host 2, so that those reads are recurring internal to each system. Okay. So one of those, you power one off, it's just an MPIO path failover. You power off the host, the compute goes as well, the HA kicks in and restarts. Or like that 6,000 site use case, it's fault tolerant protection on the guests. So we're sitting there as our dumb SAN device, and the guest VMs are there duplicated in compute as well over those networks to be fault tolerant protected, zero downtime failover. Now obviously that's all about provisioning. As far as ongoing large-scale manageability, there's then a dashboard view that's up there for statuses and things like that, license management, and then upgrades. So being able to upgrade sites 1 through 100, Friday at 10 o'clock, it does all your health checks to make sure that it's going to be a non-disruptive upgrade on the other side with it as well. That's on the vCenter side. I mean, you can go to the appliance web GUI as well. Think like your ESX host appliance. You can go direct to an appliance if vCenter was down. You get a great deal of visibility there. The appliances themselves, these guys here, if I just edit, come on. Just to show that I'm not lying, per that slide, one CPU, this has got 9 gig of memory where it's doing some caching stuff as well. The 512 meg boot and that 20 gig journal, so this really lightweight VM. And also you can see here that they have a sort of console view where you can do some basic tasks. Again, if you were talking direct to a host in that critical scenario, you can go to a web interface, you can get some statistics and things like that as well. and these guys are then out there doing the legwork from the notifications perspective as well, being able to alert out through syslog or up into vCenter as well. So if I reference some of our GreenLake managed customers with HP, for example, they configure the appliances to alert out to a syslog box that then will raise a ServiceNow ticket based on whatever events then triggered, for example, that kind of thing. So automatic ticket creation and all that good stuff as well. So this one here is per location, effectively, so per data center, it's the objects beneath. But then that dashboard view gives you then everything managed by that vCenter, so scalable and scalable to these large networks that we're not too noisy on them as well. So it's all done through this discovery service, static entries, all that good stuff. And again, that kind of comes to my point of enterprise class, but simple. It's designed for these environments. There's none of this, oh, actually, sorry, you need to enable multicast for it to see each other and all this kind of stuff. It's targeted for these use cases. Okay. So touch on very briefly then, just what we've got 10 minutes left, I believe. The big one that I wanted to emphasize, just because this was something that I was quite heavily involved in, being a software solution and that software flexibility, 6,000 sites. The bit that I'm most proud of with that, because I fed into and I worked with and helped build the automation, that was a bunch of Python automation run through Ansible and everything else. They were deploying 250 of these things a week. Okay? What was the buzzword that they gave you? Infrastructure as code. But either way, it's very powerful stuff when you start getting it. When you're able to cookie cutter that much because of what you can figure out and what you can then automate and how quickly you can get it out there, which needs to be a true statement at that scale. So 250 a week, had it been a physical box, they'd have still been doing it 2 years later and then having to refresh the hardware that they start, you get this rolling refresh. This they can get out there very, very quickly because it's all software based. So I'm hoping you agree, pretty powerful stuff and pretty useful for its use cases and everything else. Bruce, I'm just finishing up, I was going to do some Q&A. Did you have anything you wanted to add? He's on mute. He's West Coast, I think he's probably going back to bed. He's not answering. All right. Thank you very much for listening to me. Questions, please. I mean, you've kind of thrown some really good ones out there as we've been going through, but is there anything that you want to see more on those demo systems? Is there anything that I can add to, please?
Well, thank you again for this impressive presentation. It's really, it sounds like magic, right?
StorMagic.
So one question.
Yes, please.
Assuming I'm aiming to publish an article, just summarizing your presentation, what would be your advice for a magic teasing title?
A magic title for SvSAN. High availability for the edge, to be done at the scale of thousands, or to be enabled for thousands of environments. I think that's my thing. It's Bruce started off right at the beginning of the SMB use case being the same as sort of one of these environments, and a high-end $100,000 solution of 3 node and everything else is not the right fit. They're fantastic products for multi-node scale or everything else, but they're not the right fit for these edge use cases and those SMBs. It's all about resilience. Thank you. Please.
Should we still be thinking about edge versus centralized storage? Should we be thinking about the data in the right place at the right time, depending on all sorts of parameters like cost and latency and business benefit, cost effectiveness, and really thinking in edge itself as a silo?
So you raise a really interesting point, and a lot of my use cases are struggling to scope and size when you put it out there in 3,000 locations, for example, what the future's going to bring. But everything that they do, and part of that cost piece, is cost sensitive. And they're looking, when it comes to the right data in the right place, being able to do that at the most granular level that they can. So doing it within their applications and things like that, and processing it, and having to suffer or struggle through that VMs versus containers and how they can bring those things, the infrastructure side of things is effectively get it out there and have that piece, and then we can grow, we can shrink, we can do what we need.
But the definition of right is changing. It used to be shareholder value, and now it may well be sustainability. And so you really want an AI machine learning out there in which you tell it what your policies are, what your overall objectives are, and then it goes away and manages for you and tells you what it's done. Yeah. Are you looking at that sort of thing at all?
It's effectively closer to that vSAN-like storage policies use case and everything else.
Yes.
We're not there yet. It's that dumb block storage, and we are staying in the environments that we're in. Again, 3 refreshes, that's 15 years with customers and things like that. That says something. But I agree that there will be futures looking like that. I absolutely see the need there. I agree with you.